How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Bestball with Bindles Dynasty Edition. We are here with my good friend Ferris. We're in 10, 15 Dynasty leagues together. He is deep in the Dynasty streets. We are going to do a little comparison of our rankings, talk about how to value the rookies, and just the big changes that have been going on in the Dynasty market, and kind of overall picture of what the Dynasty landscape looks like before the NFL draft hits. All right, let's hit the intro and we will get into it. How's it going, Ferris?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Glad we
Yeah.
can finally connect and do this.
Yeah, dude. I was gonna say, like I said, I think we're in. I don't even know how many leagues together. Obviously, whenever I have one or you make one, we always link up and reach out to each other. Back to the BPP days, and yeah, good to finally virtually meet you. So yeah, the first thing I wanted to start off with is just kind of what is your fantasy football background? Like everyone has different ways they get into it, and just kind of where did you get started? Fantasy do you play, and just like your dynasty kind of portfolio and mindset.
Yeah, I've been playing fantasy football for a long time. I started out, just initially just as like a hobby with friends back in school. I think my first league was actually when players like LaDainian and Tomlinson were still
Oh
playing. So
wow.
this was like probably 20 years ago actually. So it was back then I was just casual playing, played growing up, high school and then in college with friends, and it was always just something, I did with buddies, just competing and kind of trash talk each other and stuff. And then I think about like what maybe five years ago or so, one of my buddies from college decided to start up a Dynasty League, and I've never actually played in Dynasty at all prior to that, and it seemed like something that I thought would be enjoyable, and I joined it, and you know the moment I like started getting into draft prep and all that stuff, it was just incredibly fun because Dynasty just brought like a new whole layer of like depth and strategy that I've really enjoy. And once I got into that, you do one league and then all of a sudden I'm doing 5 leagues, 10 leagues, found some discords, and now I'm up to like I think 50 leagues in Dynasty. I even started doing like campus to canton leagues, like that includes college players as well. So it's I've gone down the rabbit hole for sure, but it's been exciting, and Dynasty has connected me with a bunch of amazing people like yourself, and I really love the community and people that the discussions that we have and the discords and stuff, and yeah, it's I think it's still a hobby of mine, but I've definitely gone I would say towards the degen end of things these days.
Yeah, no, I definitely. Yeah, it's funny how it snowballs, right? But yeah, I'd say same with me. Like I just right, you start off, you're playing in a work league or playing in your home league, and then it just snowballs from there. And yeah, Dynasty is just yeah, there's just so much strategy, right? And there's no, I mean, we think there's a right and wrong way to do it, but like people can win and still be successful, and there's different avenues to do that. So it's I empathize with your journey as well. Um, so so yeah, we just caveat before we get into the rankings and everything. With like Ferris said, he's in like 50 leagues. I'm in, I don't even know, 50, 55 leagues, something like that. So we definitely are portfolio players. So that definitely changes the way that you kind of even approach playing Dynasty, because obviously if you're playing in a couple leagues and you just, whatever, you have an affinity for a certain player or whatever, like I'm not going to tell you trade this guy for this other guy just to do it. It's a little bit different where we are kind of treating it kind of like a stock market where we want a certain percentage of a player. And you don't, even if you don't necessarily like a player, if they hold a kind of higher value in the market, then you don't want to just sell them immediately just because you value them lower or whatever. it's definitely a fickle game in that sense, and you kind of always want to keep your finger on the pulse and see what's going on in your leagues. Kind of use different sources to figure out kind of where the market is, and it's a little bit easier in the off season when obviously no football is being played, so the market kind of settles in terms of ADP and value, at least in different pockets between the draft time and free agency and whatnot. But yeah, in season is definitely super crazy because there's not as much consensus, and it's just kind of I think that's almost one of the times where it's you can capitalize the most on players that you think like let's just say whatever Bijan has 3 bad games or something, or some blue chip prospect. I guess Brock Bowers would be a good example. Like I think he was pretty much unattainable after his first few games, but up until that point, like people would still like. I think I flipped a Dalton Kincaid plus a little bit for a Bowers like the first week of the season. So until people actually see it, a lot of times, especially with rookies and young players, they don't necessarily. You still have that opportunity. So yeah, just a quick caveat before we uh, go fully into it. But yeah, let's pull up your rankings, Ferris.
Yeah, sounds good. But yeah, like you were saying, I think the most important thing to always keep in mind in Dynasty, especially with rankings, is that they are fluid at all times. And especially like once we get into the season and certain points of the draft, like when it comes to rookie picks and stuff, there's like values fluctuate depending on the time of year, and especially in season when players are performing or underperforming or injuries happen. You just have to always be willing to move in the direction the market is moving and just stay on top of that. If you stay, that's the thing about ranks. It's always important to keep that in mind, and it also depends on like if your team is competing or rebuilding, which we can get a bit into as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point, right? Like different goals for your team definitely affect, right? Like certain players and how you value them, and that's huge as well. And then yeah, like you said, it's always fluid. So yeah, like I think we this is our first time doing this together, kind of a little dynasty roundtable ranking show. But yeah, like after the draft, like right, maybe we'll probably update stuff, and then there'll be a lot of movement with all the actual draft spots and everything, and how that affects other players. And so yeah, definitely like I think once a month I'm going to try to uh, do a quick stream and just kind of go over things and what has changed and where the market is going and how that affects things. So yeah, first thing on the docket is we just kind of want to talk through rookies and pre-draft, kind of with projected draft capital, and also just evaluations based on different sources and kind of our process where we're going to value them. So Ferris, why don't you kind of talk through kind of your like rookie process and kind of how you're going about valuing rookies right now when we don't have the actual draft capital.
Right. Yeah. So for me, it's like I approach it in two ways. First, I look at the analytics and the advanced stats for all the rookies. Just purely analytic take. Like I don't watch any film, don't follow any film people, none of that. I just basically look down at analytics for each position based on how that translates to like fantasy points in my typical leagues I play in, which is mostly PPR based leagues with tight end premium. So I'll do that first, and then once I figure out which rookies I like from an analytics point, then I have a few film people that I follow as well that I'll go and kind of get their film takes and blend the two together, and then have discussions with people in various discords and communities and people I know in the space, and just see where people are at. And then once I kind of have put those two together, I get a rough idea of like which players I like more, maybe than consensus or below consensus. And then, of course, draft capital and landing spots are huge. My ranks are definitely going to move after we get like landing spots and draft capital, but I would say I try to prior to the draft, I try to at least incorporate expected draft capital into my rankings at least a little bit. But I definitely will have certain players much higher in my ranks prior to the draft and prior to draft landing spots, and then afterwards depending on if there's something that goes in the way that I might not expect, I'll move players around based on that as well.
Yeah, that's a good caveat as well because right now, like look, we were talking about Jackson Dart before we hopped on. It's like if he gets top 10 capital, that will obviously change how we view him versus if he falls to the second round somehow, right? Like that's a huge swing in value.
Yep.
Even if we like the player, it definitely changes stuff. Um, so yeah, first rookie is Ashton Genty. You have him ranked at 14, and I have him in a similar tier in my rankings. Something that I've noticed that I want to call out is I've made a couple trades for the 101, which we're obviously penciling in Genty for, and I kind of feel like it's still undervalued a little bit, which is not. It's like I feel like when it was Bijan 101, it was like completely unattainable, and I mean where we're valuing him, right? You have him at 14, so like basically a 1-2 turn startup pick
Yep.
value. I still feel like you can get in. I mean, it's not a huge value, but like slightly a value than where when he actually gets a landing spot because there is that uncertainty of where he will go. And I'm just so confident in the talent and the ability and the profile that that definitely stands out to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, he's arguably maybe even a better prospect than what Bijan was, and I probably have him right behind Saquon in terms of prospects that I like for running backs in the past years. He just does it all. He's amazing as a runner, catches passes. Like this last year, that's the thing I think maybe why some people might be willing to move off of him is they might not be realizing that prior to this year he was amazing as a pass catcher. Like he put up monster numbers, and this last year he just didn't have to catch passes. He was running the ball like 30 times a game for like 150, 200 yards and more. So they just didn't need to use him as a pass catcher, but the guy was an elite pass catcher as a freshman and sophomore in college, and I think there's very little flaws to his game. So I think even now, honestly, I I I wouldn't fault anyone for taking him ahead of Bijan and Gibbs. You get a little bit of an age difference there, and honestly, Genty has like skill set that is as good as both of them. So definitely
Yeah,
willing to acquire him if you can get it for cheaper than market price right now. If people are scared off of him, or people, there might be teams that are don't want to hold a running back. With the 101, they want to move off of that. If you can get him for some of the guys that I have below him, I definitely will consider that if you're a competing team.
yeah. I mean we've done a couple startups recently, and I mean he usually goes in like the kind of mid to
Yeah,
late second round, which I think we both have him higher in our rankings. So it's not a huge market inefficiency, but I think especially if you get like trade a package for him instead of a one for one. Yeah, like you said, if people just like don't, they're kind of in a rebuild and they don't feel like they need a running back on the roster. It's not the time for them to kind of utilize the running back. I think that's where you can kind of pounce and whatever trade 103 or 104 and a 108 and then some other stuff on top and they will see that as a win for them and you see that as a win for you because you're maybe paying less than you actually value him. So
yep. And he's not a player that I'm worried about the draft capital or landing spot. I think no matter where he
exactly.
goes, he's going to be an elite player. So
Yeah, I think that is the one thing that's still like making him attainable. Like I said, is like the just a slight uncertainty of where he could go, and like I don't think there's anywhere that it would change my
yeah, even if he
opinion
goes
on.
to the Raiders at 6, I'm okay with that. They're gonna use him.
Absolutely.
They're gonna use him a bunch. So
So yeah, so then after Genty, he's kind of in a tier of his own in terms of value and kind of what we're projecting going into this year. So after that, it's I think obviously Amarian Hampton is getting projected first round capital right now, um, and Cam Ward is projected to go 101 to the Titans right now. So kind of how are you valuing kind of these next 4 or 5 tier of guys and like what are you kind of what are your early takes on those guys?
yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Hampton, but the expectation right now is that he is gonna get first round draft capital, and because of that, any running back that does get first round draft capital, especially if it's to a pretty, I would say, to a good landing spot, and it's in the earlier rounds rather than like the late first. I definitely am just going to immediately move him up in my rankings, regardless of my take on the player. I think it just provides so much installation value. And Hampton, it's not that I don't think he's like a terrible prospect by any means. I don't personally think he's a first round talent for the like NFL team to take him there. But the expectation right now is that he will be taken there, and if he is taken there, he has a receiving profile that I like enough that I do think the volume will be there, and he'll just be like a volume-based play that I think will put up back-end RB1 numbers for you. So, and I'm willing to take him. Here in my rankings, I have him ranked 29 overall, and I'm willing to take him around the same ranges I would take like an Achane or a Bucky. So
Yeah, like young running backs are just they have so much value insulation, right?
yeah, yep,
Especially a first round. And yeah, I agree on the actual profile. Like he has a great statistical profile. I don't think it's like the super highest upside, but it is just he's going to get volume, especially if he's drafted that high. And it's just you can't really go wrong. It's kind of a can't fail thing when you get both of those things. So, and I still think like I think also because people view Genti as in a tier kind of right above in his own. I think the 102 and 103 uh, also could be depending on who falls there. Like still pretty acquirable here in this couple weeks before the draft. Once we get into the draft and there's actual like we know exactly who we're going to take there and we have the actual landing spots. I think it'll be a little bit harder. So I do think this is a good time to kind of trade for picks before there's while there's still a little bit of uncertainty.
yeah. I
Um,
I think there's definitely still value in picks. Like I've done a few drafts where we had rookies included, and in general, in those drafts, the rookies get picked much earlier than the actual spots where placeholders are used. So
yeah.
I do think people are more, for some reason, it's that inefficiency that people are more willing to take the players they like earlier than they would the placeholders, which should be technically the same player. So I do think right now picks are definitely undervalued in the marketplace in terms of relative value, based on draft capital and like how I see the players. So yeah, if you can still acquire picks for cheaper than what you might pay later, it's definitely a good option to consider.
So I know you're very high on Travis Hunter. I have him in the same range. Obviously, it's contingent on him playing wide receiver, but I feel like kind of all roads are leading towards that. I think I obviously we're fantasy football degen, so we're assuming that. But kind of what is your take on Travis Hunter, and if he does play wide receiver and get the projected draft capital that we're projecting, like kind of where would you take him, and just overall thoughts on Travis Hunter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think if it wasn't if I there wasn't any if there wasn't uncertainty about his role in the NFL, like splitting like maybe splitting between him and playing DB and wide receiver, maybe getting limited snaps, I would definitely have him as my 102, like for sure. And even then, I think I'm still above market. I have him like as my 103 pretty clearly. I think he's by far the best wide receiver in this class. I don't really have any questions about his skill set. I think he's just an elite athlete and probably one of the best wide receivers we've seen at the catch point and in years. And I think his ceiling is as high as any elite wide receiver in the NFL right now. So I'm a huge fan of his. And I'm willing to take the risk even now, like early on him without having certainty. And I don't think we're gonna get certainty after the draft. Like even if he somehow fell to the Patriots and didn't go to the Browns or Giants or first overall, um, I still don't think a team's gonna come out and just say, hey, he's gonna be like a full-time wide receiver. I think he's going to definitely um, most likely play both roles in some capacity. But I do think he's just too good of a talent as a wide receiver. And if you look at how much wide receivers are being paid, he's gonna want to, he's gonna want to play wide receiver because he knows
Lean
that's where
towards
the
that
money's
way, yeah.
yeah. And for a team as well, like the cost of having a rookie wide receiver, um, it saves them a lot of money because just the price you have to pay for wide receivers has been increasing to um, higher levels than for DBs these days. So yeah, I'm really high on him. I'm a huge fan. I think I've already in the drafts where I've been able to draft rookies before and some Devy drafts I already have shares of him, but I'm gonna try to get as many shares of him as possible. And even if it doesn't work out where a team limits his snaps, um, I'm fine taking that risk, to be honest. I think the upside is worth it for most of the teams that I have.
Yeah, I think that's like a good just overall kind of meta point as well is like we're talking about, right, these different buying opportunities. It's like people don't like uncertainty. That's the people shy away from uncertainty. And I think us as portfolio players, it kind of takes a weight off of us where we're like, we can take these shots for upside, right? Like the talent on Travis Hunter is just so insane and it might not pan out, but like most players and picks aren't going to be difference makers anyways. So when you get this discount on a player that could potentially, right, if he does, can you hit that parlay with those him playing wide receiver and him kind of he's still pretty raw, right? Like he's very talented, but he hasn't really spent that much time uh, like focusing on the intimate details of being a wide receiver because he's playing both ways. He could easily be right if he's playing wide receiver, be like a second round startup pick, like right easily. So it's really about shooting for the moon, and that's I think I definitely agree with your take on him. It's like this is a rare opportunity that we get to take a player this talented,
Yep.
and I think because of the uncertainty, we'll be able to get him. I don't know where exactly he'll end up, like maybe 105, 106, depending on. Obviously, it'll vary in every draft. I think he's the one wild card. But yeah, definitely with you on that one.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
great thing is you don't have to take him at the 103. Like I mean, in some cases you might, depending on your league mates, you might have to, but in
yeah,
other drafts he's gonna fall, and you're gonna be able to get a really high upside value pick that. I think it's also just something I just want to quickly mention is like the reason why I'm so willing to take him here in this class. I don't really necessarily think the other players that would go behind him are people that I like their profile enough to have them over him. In last year's class, I definitely would have put that risk a bit higher because there was a lot of other players that I would have liked. But the rookie class this year, after Genti, it's just kind of it's pretty fluid. Like for a lot of these guys, like I don't necessarily think one is that much better than another. So pending landing spot of draft capital, of course. But yeah, I think just Hunter just is kind of he's kind of in his own tier and wide receivers in this class for me.
Yeah, and we've been like the last two drafts specifically, like I think we've been kind of spoiled with the number of blue chip prospects, right? And so we it's hard a lot of times to kind of realize, right? Like we're just kind of expecting all of these guys to be really good. And I agree. I mean, not I'm sure we'll still have a lot of hits, but I don't think just like the security of knowing that like these guys are blue chip prospects, like it's very hard for them to fail. I don't think we necessarily have that. So definitely a point where you're, yeah, like you said, willing to take the risk on Hunter. So then kind of the next, we talked about Cam Ward a little bit. Him and Tet, I think, right? Like they're probably up there for the 102, 103, 104 spots. I see you have Cam Ward ranked kind of in the one mid first, so pretty high up, 47 overall. What are your thoughts on those two players and just from kind of a prospect perspective?
Yeah. Well, the QBs in this class to me are overall are not super impressive, but I do think Ward is very likely to go first overall in the NFL draft. I think that's what's probably going to play out. And I do think there is some upside to his skill set. I think he shows certain things off platform that I think could translate very well to NFL, and I do think he has a pretty accurate and strong enough arm to be a solid like QB. And if a team drafts him first overall, they're going to be committed to him. So I do think Ward could be somewhere in like the Baker, Goff, like Trevor Lawrence tier eventually. I mean I already have him pretty close to those guys, so I'm at least for the QBs in this class, I'm most confident in him long term as like sticking around NFL and being a solid like. Oh, he could move up into like back end QB1, but most likely he's going to be like a high end QB2 for you for most years. And honestly, high end QB2s in Dynasty are things you want to have on your roster. So I'm a
Pretty valuable.
yeah. And then uh, with Tet, um, yeah, Tet is he's like actually I actually do consider him like a pretty high risk prospect. You know, there's a lot of people who really love his game and think it's going to translate to the NFL. I do have some concerns about, you know, separation ability and his ability to play. I would say like he doesn't have the lateral agility compared to someone like a Drake London. I've seen him comp to Drake London, so he is going to be a. I do think he's a bit of a limited player right now, and there is some risk because of his profile. He's probably going to be, you know, an X receiver, and to be an X receiver at like a elite level, you do need to have um, certain skill sets that I think he still needs to work on and develop. But yeah, I think he's a solid wide receiver prospect. In most draft classes, you know, I probably wouldn't be taking him with an early first. He'd probably be like a mid to late first for me in most classes, but I think he is a solid pick. I do think there's upside in a player like him. I'm a little bit cautious about some things in his profile as well.
Yeah, that's very good. Kind of overall take on him. I think. So yeah, let's go back to Cam Ward really quick though. Yeah, because I think it's so hard to know and just prospect quarterbacks, like, right, like if they get drafted highly, we just kind of have to take the shot. So I think Cam Ward does have a skill set. He kind of he runs enough, not like a super like running quarterback, Konami quarterback, but he'll give you some running points and goal line touchdowns and stuff like that, zone read. And he definitely has like a big arm and kind of like the toolsiness that we like to see from these guys that go high. And I think where you have him is I have him around the same range. And yeah, quarterbacks are king in Superflex, which we play almost exclusively. So it's just kind of a shot you want to take, even if you're not like. I don't think we are like super into Cam Ward as a prospect.
Yeah, no.
Like we said, this quarterback class isn't one of the best ones we've seen in most recent years, but you just kind of have to eat your vegetables, take him, and he's a pretty good bet to rise in value, being that if he's a first or second overall pick. So yeah, if there, I think it's just kind of like throw your hands up and go with the draft capital for a quarterback drafted in the
Yeah,
top
he's one
spot.
of those players that his chance to elevate his team is a little bit limited in my eyes. He's gonna probably need to be given, you know, some elite playmakers eventually to kind of rise up in terms of his like production for you. But I mean, I think if he settles in like the Baker, Goff, like that range of players for you, I think it's still a win. In terms of like what you're paying for him, it's a
Yeah,
solid bet to take.
it's just so hard to get quarterbacks right. So
Yeah, it is. Yep.
and then yeah, back to Tet really quick. Yeah, I agree. Like I think he's a good prospect, but in other classes he'd be kind of going like kind of what 107, 108, 109, like kind of that range.
Yeah.
We're kind of like a lad last year or a BTJ we're going last year, kind of that late first, and I think he's getting pushed up just due to the class. Yeah, I think we're getting a little bit of FUD on him recently that he might fall to the late first, which I don't care about that much. But just compared to earlier in the offseason where we were like, oh, he's going to be a top 5 pick or a top 10 pick at worst. Obviously, that is a little scary just in terms of where we viewed him as a prospect kind of coming in versus now. But yeah, I think this is a good range, right? Like a lot of these wide receivers in this range, after you kind of get past the T. Higgins, Rashi Rice, Xavier Worthy, like kind of this whole range after that is just one big blob of guys where you can kind of move them around. And I wouldn't really argue with you. So I think taking Tet where he's going to be going, probably 104, 105, I think he still has the upside being a rookie and a profile where it's like, I'm excited, but I'm not like just smashing the button.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think even if he does fall, that's fine. Like if he ends up in a better landing spot, I would actually like him even more if he can get a good QB. rather than going
Yeah,
to like one of the worst teams.
yeah,
So I would be pretty excited if he was to land with like a really elite QB. Then I think some of the risk will be lowered in my eyes for him.
that's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. So I see you have Travion Henderson up here in the mid first value range, so around like late fourth startup pick. Is he your running back three in the class?
Yeah, he's my RB3. But I actually, if I was to just strictly compare him as a player to like Hampton, I actually like him more than Hampton. But I don't necessarily think that he is more. I think he's definitely less likely compared to Hampton to get first round draft capital. I wouldn't say there's a 0% chance that he gets first round draft capital. There's certain things in his arsenal as a player. I think that a team might be willing to pay like a late first for him. But I think it's more likely he's going to be like a early round two pick. And then that's why I have him slightly behind. But I really love the player a lot. I think he's really good.
Yeah, he just kind of reminds me of kind of like a DeAndre Swift, but like actually good at like the little things that coaches like the pass blocking and kind of just actually putting effort into stuff that is not quote fun. Where I feel like Swift is like the exact opposite. Like he's super talented, but he doesn't have good vision. He doesn't pass block well. He kind of always bounces stuff outside, which just
Yep.
kind of limits him from what he could be if he did do those things. So I think the pass catching, just the home run hitting ability for him is very very enticing. And yeah, I think in that second round, there's a lot of good landing spots for him where he doesn't need to be the workhorse because of his skill set. And if you have him paired with an early down grinder that can kind of take some of the low value touches, I think that would actually be pretty optimal. I mean, obviously we want our running backs to be workhorses, but there's just not that many of those guys. So I do agree. Like I don't like Hampton as much as a prospect. Like he doesn't have the same upside from just like a pure talent perspective, but really, the most valuable thing for Hampton is just his ability to kind of be that workhorse and take on that whatever big role of getting touches. So yeah, I think Henderson is a very very exciting guy, and I think he's also a very good lock to once you get a landing spot. And we get some clips in August of him, whatever, taking a screen to the house or whatever it may be. He's going to rise up in value. So
Yeah, I think he's arguably like one of the best pass blockers in the class too. So a team is gonna see that and they're gonna keep him on the field for the third, for third downs in that role as well. And like you mentioned, like his home run ability is elite. And I think even if he was only getting like, let's say like 12, 13 carries a game, but it's getting all the pass work and has the ability to hit a home run at any point as well, I think he's going to be a fantastic player, to be honest, for you to have. And there is always a possibility that he could land in a spot where a team is more willing to give him like a three down role where he does get more rushing work. Because I do think he is capable of handling that. He did deal with some injuries, but there's nothing about his size as a player. I mean, he's like I think he's like what 212 or something. He's
yeah,
big enough to handle a three down work. I don't necessarily think that's what is likely going to happen, but um, there is that little extra upside in his portfolio that he could end up having a role like that at some point.
yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, it's like right, we're not going to assume that, but
Yeah.
we're like if he gets a three down workload, like he's shooting up in value
Oh yeah, he is.
to
Yep.
like what second round pick probably something crazy like that.
Yeah, I think he'd be somewhere where Brees was valued in the past years, honestly. Like end of
Yeah,
second round, early third round type player, maybe even more. Like people if people see him getting that role, he's performing, he's gonna be highly valued. So he's definitely a player I'm targeting in my drafts.
absolutely. So then let's talk about the quarterbacks first before we kind of talk about these other guys in this range because it is just kind of a weird conundrum or like we were just talking about with Cam Ward. Like if they get the draft capital, you kind of just want to eat your vegetables and take them at a certain point. And that's kind of been a winning strategy, like just overall in Dynasty, is just take the quarterbacks that are drafted highly, and some of them are going to bust, but some of them are going to pay off. So yeah, so to kind of talk about the next range of Shador and Jackson Dart, who we both have pretty high up,
Yep.
where there's a little bit of uncertainty with his draft capital, but it looks more and more like he's going. We see this every year, but it looks like he's going to go higher and higher just because teams are so quarterback needy.
Yeah. Yeah. Not huge fans of either. I do think I like Dart a little bit more. He's has some athletic upside, rushing upside as well, and I think overall as like a passer, I prefer hit the way he, the upside he has is a little bit higher in my eyes than Shador. But I think both of them are pretty likely at this point to get first round draft capital. I don't think that they're going to land in like the top five or even top 10. I think they're more likely to land somewhere in the middle, first round, early first round. But if they do get that first round draft capital, I think that value insulation is gonna definitely give them time, and their value is likely to rise if they do get the first round draft capital. And I do think Dart is good enough to be a starting quarterback at least initially for a couple years. And same with Shador. I'm not like a huge fan of him. I think he takes a bit too much sacks, and he doesn't handle pressure that well. I do think he has an accurate arm, but it's not really the best arm in my opinion. Um, and he's not really gonna give you any rushing upside at all. So there's some flaws to both of their game. In most classes, again, I think because this QB class is just relatively weak. In most classes, I don't think they would be first round picks, or if they were, they'd be very late first round picks. They kind of, in my eyes, both profile as like I would say day two picks. But in this case, teams are there's a lot of teams that need QB. It's a position that's needed in Dynasty. A QB2 on your team is also something that's always important to have and needed. So I kind of place them based on that my perception of the value that they're going to offer rather than like the skill that I think they have as as players.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just being quarterbacks drafted, assuming in the first round wherever they go, like that's just going to buoy their value so much. So yeah, definitely, I agree with you. Like they're being propped up by the kind of the class. But yeah, I'm willing to take the shot. I mean, yeah, I agree. Like I think Dart, he is more athletic. He obviously is coming from that kind of weird Ole Miss system where it's kind of hard to project. But I think the toolsiness that he has and um, just yeah, the projected draft capital, I'm willing to take it. Over Shooter just seems very low ceiling for me. Like it's like even if he is good, he's not going to run that much. He isn't going to give you rushing touchdowns. He's not really. He'll be accurate, and if he lands in the right system in the right spot, he'll be productive. Like, but not like QB1. I don't think that's really in his
Yeah,
range of outcomes.
I don't think so. He's like a Mac Jones type player in my eyes. Like that's kind of where that's the kind of bucket I would put him in. I do think for both these guys though, it would be in their benefit to land in a spot where they can sit for a year or maybe two. And then even if they were first round picks, honestly, I think there's been like cases like reports where Steelers might be interested in Dart, and then if the Steelers were to get Aaron Rodgers for a year and Dart was to sit behind Aaron Rodgers, I think that actually would be a good thing for him. I think if you look at someone like Dart, and even Shador, like year to year, they've shown a lot of growth and progression. So I do think for them to sit and maybe develop and work on certain things for a year would be good. And there's nothing wrong with taking that path. We've seen it with guys like Jordan Love, right, where they sit for a bit and then they come out and they probably look better than what was expected. So ideally, for me, if I'm drafting them, that's what I would want. But there's going to be probably teams that will want them to start pretty quickly. So there's not NFL teams aren't always the most patient with their players, especially when it comes to QB and things aren't going well. So
Yeah, even to their detriment sometimes, right? They're
yeah,
just throw them
definitely.
into the fire, and it's just figure it out, and can go bad for sure. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the two tight ends, Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland. You have them both right pretty high. Like I think you have Tyler Warren at 54, and then you have Loveland at 62. Um, Both of them are looking like they'll get first round draft capital. Warren pretty much a lock. I think Loveland. it's projected that he'll go kind of in that last third of the first round. But even if he's an early second round pick, I think he is a pretty strong prospect, really, really good receiving tight end, and I think more than adequate as a blocker, based on some film guys that I've seen talk about him. But yeah, how do you feel about these tight ends? I think obviously if it were a stronger class, they would kind of be probably late first round picks. But yeah, how do you feel about both of them as prospects?
Yeah, I mean, I actually like Warren and Loveland, both as prospects. I don't think they're not anywhere close to like someone where Brock Bowers was. Of course, I think Brock Bowers was like a unicorn in that end.
Absolutely.
But I do think they somewhere in like the Sam Laporta Hawkinson range of like players. I see both of them uh, kind of in that mold, and it seems pretty. I mean, it's pretty likely both are gonna get first round draft capital, and depending on their landing spots, I think that will move one or the other maybe ahead of ahead a bit. But I think in tight end premium leagues, if you're playing anything like point 0.5 tight end premium or more, they're just good solid bets. Like Warren is a player that there's some things in his profile where where he was really kind of a late yeah, kind of a year five breakout player, but I think what he did this year was enough to show me that he can be a focal point of an offense. And for in a tight end premium league, having a tight end that has that skill set is very valuable. And Loveland, honestly, I think has a lot of potential, like to be an elite tight end pass catcher. Like and he's good enough as a blocker to still be able to play in line. So I'm not concerned at all about his ability to stay on the field for like majority of snaps. And there's going to be if Loveland was ever to land in like a position where a team is willing to just like funnel the offense through him, and same in case in Warren, if a team is willing to funnel offense through him, they can put up like top three tight end finishes like, quite easily in my mind. So they're both, I think, just solid picks. There's some uncertainty about like some of the other players in that range, so I'm more than happy to take both of them. I think they're having a tight end that can be a top five tight end it is a, a bonus and a benefit. Like it's something that you can have over your opponents. So I'm looking to draft both of them in most of my teams, I would say.
Yeah, I think Warren is kind of being propped up as like the clear tight end one, and I think he probably will be obviously drafted like that. But I I almost feel like Loveland is the same,